you doing? It's a nice way to spend a Friday. It is Friday, isn't it? It's Friday, yeah. I love the way to spend a Friday. I've had the absolute pleasure of, I don't know if I need to use this mic or this one, but I like holding a microphone. Oh, do you want it? There you go, sorry. I've had the absolute pleasure of interviewing our guest today on a number of occasions, from my podcast, on the premieres of his films, and last year when himself and his wife won the Outstanding Contribution to Film at BAFTAs, quite rightly so, and long time coming. And this is a great opportunity for you to just kind of pick his brain about his wonderful experiences and world in this industry for so long, and the diversity of films that he's worked on, both him himself but with his company as well. And just to give you a little insight into, I'm sure some of you have, all of you might have seen a number of one of at least of his films, just to remind you of some of the brilliant work that Stephen Woolley has put together. Here's a little sizzle of some of his work.
We don't sell things. We sell dreams.
I'm sorry. Thought you knew.
Why are you creeping about? I'm not creeping about.
I am an actor. I know only my art.
Excuse me, but do we know you?
Not in this lifetime.
Now look with your vampire eyes.
They call us murderers.
Why don't you just stop hurting so many women and focus on hurting just me?
Whisper in my ear.
Kind! Who am I to be kind?
Therese Balabat. It's lovely.
And yours?
Carol.
This strike is about one thing, and one thing only. Equal pay or nothing. Everybody, out!
I've never been in a Rolls Royce before. I feel like the Queen.
I need my name on the book.
Love doesn't end just because we don't see each other. Do you really have to smoke that thing? I mean, couldn't you just mime?
I can mime smoking. I can't mime smoke.
That's a car.
Ladies and gentlemen, please, the wonderful Stephen Woolley. Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I mean, what a collection of films. This is a great opportunity. I'm going to throw it out to you guys to start this ball rolling with questions, but I'm selfishly going to just ask a couple because I have him here. How do you feel when you get that opportunity, which I don't know if that's a thing that happens often, where you just get a snapshot of just some of the work that you've been involved in?
Well, it's really odd because Edith and I were talking, and we talked about this before. I don't really know quite how I ended up producing films, which is obviously rubbish for you guys because that's what we're going to be talking about. But I look at all those clips and they all seem so familiar and so new and so recent to me. But for so many of you, you probably haven't seen half those films, have you? I mean, how many of you here have seen those films or clips of those films? Oh, it's quite a lot.
That's
of you.
pretty awesome.
Yeah. But I kind of fell into it, and when I look at them, I feel just probably as amazed as anybody else, thinking, how did I manage to do that much? But it's exciting to see it, and it's also it's just probably as inspiring for me as it might be for somebody else to think, you can still keep making films.
So excited by it.
And you can get, and you always, I never think any one film that I've made, or that Elizabeth and I've made, or I've made with Neil Jordan, or with any other long-term creative partner, is it. There's always another one. You know, you're always driving forward. So I think when I watch it, it's partly a sense of satisfaction, but also a sense of dissatisfaction that, you know, that could have been better, or maybe next time around we could do. Now I think I've kind of got the hang of that. I can make that one work better than it was then.
Well, guys, this is your time. This is a wonderful opportunity. So I'm going to open up to the microphones and things wandering about. I know it's always tough being that first person to ask a question, but don't be shy, because this is a pretty incredible opportunity for you, considering what you're studying as well. So who wants to go first? Let's go to the front, and the girl there, right in the middle. You were boom. That was great. What's your question? Microphone's just coming. Thank you. Thank you so much.
With film production, obviously you spend like a lot of time with like one idea. What are the warning signs of like oversaturation of bringing new things to that idea, and what are your favourite methods of narrowing it down to its like core story?
You mean in terms of development?
Yes.
Yeah. It's a very, very good question. You know, some of the clips that you saw on some of the movies we're working on now have been in development for not just years, but in some cases decades. The Limehouse Golem, which is a film I made with Bill Nye a couple of years ago, that was in development for 13 years with different directors, and we lost the film at a certain point, and the book rights, and then we got the book rights back, and then started with Neil Jordan, and it went to Terry Gilliam, and then we finally had a script with Jane Goldman, and there were over 3-year periods. And you sort of, you know, you get something in your head that you think something's a good idea, but you also know that the script isn't quite right. And sometimes it's you telling you that, or it's other people who are saying, God, if you can make this a little bit better, we'd really be interested in this. Or agents saying, well, our talent doesn't really want to get involved in this particular project. So it's not always you that's not sure. But then often you get to a point where you think, actually, now I think we've sort of captured the essence of what it was that was attracting us to that project, whether it was a play or whether it was Made in Dagenham was something I heard on the radio called Reunion, which was getting together the women of Dagenham who were reminiscing about what they had achieved in 1968 when they helped to get the Equal Pay Act. And I thought, well, I'm a sort of child of the 60s, and I made a lot of films and was set in the 60s, and I didn't know anything about what they'd achieved, and I didn't live that far from Dagenham. So that kicked off the process. And it was what we wanted to make a film that was celebrating those women. So the process of development with the screenplay, which meant going to see them and meet with them and have their contribution, was crucial. But what was really important was to get a script that would work. And so, you know, I think there was a certain point after a couple of years of working with that particular writer where we thought, okay, this is working, and we can start to think about getting a director or getting a cast. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes the script can be, you know, the idea is strong, but when you get to a certain point where you think, this writer isn't making this work, or I was wrong, that this idea is not quite as powerful as I thought it might be, or even somebody is out there with a film that's almost identical to the film that you thought you were going to make. Which means, for those of you, I know there are some of you out there who do want to produce, and also if you're a writer, and also if you're a director, you know, you can't just be focused on one project. I'm sure lots of people have told you this, but you've got to focus on a few projects because, you know, there are so many traps to fall into along the way. And you just got to always have another plan B or plan C or plan D. We rarely, the way we work, Elizabeth and I, is that we always have going around about anywhere between 7 to 12 projects that are being developed with different companies, because you can't put your eggs in one basket. So, and we hope, and those projects, because the development stage is so fraught with possible diversions and possible disasters, you have to keep moving, and you have to keep your mind focused on an array of films. Once you go down that rabbit hole and just go, okay, we're going to make that film for sure, something will happen. And our lives are controlled by so many other influences that we are powerless to control. So it could be that the actor who you want in that part takes another part or is unwell, or it could be that the financier who has been financing your project goes out of business, or it could be that, as I said before, 13 other vampire films are being made, and your one vampire film suddenly doesn't look quite as interesting as it did 3 years when you started it. And we can, through bluster and spin, keep something alive. Sorry, the vampire analogy is going on a bit much here, but you can breathe life into it. But but sometimes you are a dead person walking, because they're all out there. I mean, I made a film called Byzantium, which I'm very proud of and I liked very much, which was written by a terrific writer called Maura Buffini. It was based on a play that she wrote called Vampire Story, which was written first and foremost for 14-year-olds, although the film isn't really a 14 certificate. And when I started developing it with Maura, it was I had previously made Interview with the Vampire and Company of Wolves, so I love the genre, the Gothic genre, especially from a female perspective, because it's often Bram Stoker and most of the things have been done by men. So working with Angela Carter on Company of Wolves and working with Anne Rice on Interview with the Vampire was really interesting, because it's just a whole new perspective. But the time it took to get Maura to write the script, and the time it took for me to get the right director on board, which in fact was Neil Jordan, Twilight had already been made. In fact, I think a couple of Twilights had already been made. And there was a very successful vampire show on TV, 2 vampire shows on TV. And suddenly our project didn't seem as fresh and new, which is probably why it didn't do as well at the box office as I'd hoped it would. But we still did actually get it made, and as I say, I'm very proud of the film. I think it's a lovely movie, and I think that Maura did an amazing job. And Saoirse Ronan and Gemma Arterton were absolutely brilliant in the film. However, it was, it kind of reached a point, I think, where it wasn't quite as vital as it might have been a few years earlier when we first came up with the idea. So you've got to keep examining the project as it goes on, and don't let your original enthusiasm color your judgment. You have to be realistic. I mean, the one voice a producer gives to any particular production is often the voice of reality. We are all prone to our own flights of fantasy, and we all have egos. But a producer should try and keep the ego as low as possible and keep your feet firmly on the ground, because you're allowing other people to take that ground. You might get excited by a project, that book, that story, that idea, that radio show, but you're often going to be the one who's going to be carrying it beyond just a great laugh in the pub, or just a great pitch meeting, or just a great conversation with a writer. So you're going to one who actually has to be real about it, because you're going to have to carry it home. So having said that, it does mean that if you just develop one project, you could be in serious trouble if you want to do it for a living. If it's a hobby, it's fine.
Okay, next question, please. Girl down the front here. Thank you.
You started off as quite a young filmmaker, and obviously you've come really far. So is it kind of how does it feel looking back on everything you've done, and also what was it like starting off so young as well?
I did start young, and I'm going to finish young as well. My determination is to move backwards. No, I was very lucky in many respects. First and foremost, I came from where you're sitting, from the cinema seat. I literally started off by tearing tickets at my local cinema, the Screen of the Green, which used to be called the Rex, which was a real flea pit. And that term might be used for places that are flea pits, but it actually was a flea pit. And I kind of fell into movies. So I loved cinema and built up an encyclopedic knowledge of movies and liked most genres. I fell into European cinema, as most people do. At the age of about 14, 15, I saw my first Chabrol, my first Truffaut. I luckily had a course at school when I was 16 on a cinema course where I saw Bergman and Battleship Potemkin and all those movies, as well as loving Hammer horror films and mainstream cinema. So I sort of built up, and I also had this place, the National Film Theatre, as it was called then, to come and see old movies here. So growing up in London, loving films before video, was something that was my enthusiasm. It became a real passion. And then I luckily, through a series of lucky accidents, ended up with my own cinema called The Scala, which was in King's Cross in London, and I programmed 80 films a month, all-nighters, big, events. This was late 70s, 1978, when I had The Scala. And we did all sorts of things around movies. And everything you can imagine, every kind of film that you can imagine, if it had been made, we'd show it at the Scala. So I was asked to start a video company at a time when video was not existent in 1981. And not only was I was asked to acquire all the titles and work with somebody who was extremely good entrepreneurial person who was good at marketing. His name was Nick Powell. And Nick asked me to start a company with him that would, and he was Richard Branson's partner at Virgin, so he wanted to start lots of different businesses when he left Richard, and one of them was his small video company. And we had some success with the video company. We had a big hit with a horror movie called The Evil Dead and a French subtitle film called Diva. And we went from there to films like Paris, Texas and Kiss of the Spider-Woman, Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence. And I was lucky enough to go to Tokyo and see Merry Christmas first. And I went to Berlin and saw Paris, Texas and South America when I first saw Kiss of the Spider-Woman. I used to chase films around the world. and they were successful. So I lucked out, and then I moved into production in 1984 when I was quite young, and God, how old was I in 1984? I was 27. So that was my first film company, Wars, which we made because we realized that every time we went for a script or a film, other people were trying to beat us to it because we had such a good reputation for buying things. And so there was an economic reason for it. There was also the fact that I had become very close friends with a lot of filmmakers whose films I was releasing, and especially Neil Jordan, whose first film Angel, I had released. And it was sort of a mixture of people encouraging me to produce, there being a window, and it being a time when there weren't that many films being produced in the UK. And I had a great desire to see things cinematically, the way I saw the world. And I was very much inspired by, Powell and Pressburger and filmmakers who used cinema. So we tried to make proper films that would be respected in a place like the National Film Theatre or the Odeon Leicester Square or any great cinema around the world. So at a time when people were very interested in cinema was dying, we had a unique take on things. We loved movies and we wanted to celebrate films. So it was kind of like, this sounds perverse and weird, but it was like one big party. We were but in a telephone box, because nobody in the UK really thought films were very hip or much fun. They didn't know, when we discovered the Coen brothers and Jim Jarmusch, and I bought all these films from these guys and Jean-Jacques Bannex and all these people, Hector Babenka, nobody really cared here, except for a minority of critics and a few younger people and the people like us. So we sort of went out and started beating the drum and said, come and see these movies, and they are great, and going to the movies is really fun. And we hit a nerve. We distributed a lot of films for the LGBTQ audience at that time, like Carell, Torch Song Trilogy, Kiss of the Spider Woman, that appealed to an audience that previously had been totally ignored, absolutely ignored. We produced a film called Shag, which was directed by a woman, had an all-female cast with 4 female leads. Nobody had done that, as far as I could work out, for a very long time. So we were working in areas, I suppose, what people call minorities, although it did strike us as being quite funny that you would think the female audience would be minorities, given it was 50% of the population of the fucking world. Anyway, we were dealing with sort of minority audiences, and it blossomed. So as a film producer, I was tapping into something that I was passionate about, but also there was an economic reason for it. And also because I had my own successful distribution company, I also could bring something to the table. That makes it very hard to start now for producers, because you can't bring anything to the table, other than ideas and talent. And sometimes people don't see good ideas, or they don't recognize good talent. But if you can bring ideas and talent to the table and a little bit of money, then you've moved from 1 to 6 on the Snakes and Ladders, to get to your 99. You can't just come naked into the room. You have to have something else with you. And because we had our own distribution company, and because our films that we had released were everyone else perceived in the film business to be unusual or odd, when we had unusual and odd scripts, people would be unnerved. They would say, oh, yeah, but we didn't like that other film that you guys released, and you did so well with it. And, oh, God, that Nightmare on Elm Street script that you guys bought, everyone turned that down, but that turned into a big hit. And, oh, God, So by questioning people's, preconceptions about what cinema was, we were able to win them over. And also because we had our own business. So who would be stupid enough to make a film that you didn't think was going to be successful for your own business? So we were always coming at something with a different aspect. And because I was so voracious as a film goer and as somebody who wanted to learn, when I jumped into Company of Wolves, when I look back on it, I didn't realize that I was actually directing the second unit. I was just running off and dealing with the crew and running back to the director and saying, look, we've got this shot, we've got this angle, do you want this? Running back again with a stuffed wolf, or running back with and I was sort of doing so many things on that movie because I didn't know what I was doing, that it was an education. I kind of got this amazing, fortuitous education through producing my first film, but I have to say, a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time, not just in that street, in that office, by that telephone, but in that era, at a time when cinema was dying and was sort of, as far as people were concerned, other than a few anomalies like Chariots of Fire and a few more middle-brow films, people weren't, when we released Evil Dead, people said, oh, well, horror films don't work anymore, you're going to lose a load of money on that. Or when we made Company of Wolves, oh, well, you can't really get, those special effects, you've got too gory, people won't enjoy those. There was this naysaying world. It's changed hugely now. The world has grown up. Cinema goers are so much more sophisticated and so much more able to understand such, many multi-layered films, and understand that genre isn't something that just sits in the water, that you can mix everything into one big, more exciting event now. So it's changed, and people like Spike Lee and Tarantino and all the people that were around when I was young that were these films we often released, or films that filmmakers we knew and worked with, as well as international filmmakers and British filmmakers, have changed that landscape. They've pushed it to another place. And so from the moment I entered, which was a different time, a different place, a different world, to now is radically different. The things that the people out here, the people in this cinema, that you guys are going to have to go through is remarkably different from what I was going through. And from every aspect, technology, politics, acceptability, the industry itself, how films make money, how films are sold, how films are seen. It's a radical difference. The only thing that's similar is there's a big screen and there's cinema seats, but everything else has probably changed.
Next question, gentleman over here. Thank you.
I was just wondering, what is it for you in a script or even with just an idea? What gets you excited to want to produce something? What to you makes a good script?
That's really hard. I mean, I sort of think, when I started acquiring films, looking at movies and reading the scripts to begin with, I always thought something I hadn't seen before, or something that was unique or different. And so when I'd see a film, I think, oh, God, I've not seen that before. I'd always think, well, I've seen quite a lot. So I feel the same way about subject matter. I always put it in a perspective of if I'm excited by this, it probably means there's something in here that's original, unique, or different. So I think that's one factor. I think I'm also, whether I like it or not, I am thinking about markets, places. Who's going to want to see this film, other than the selfishness of me wanting to make a film for me or my mates, or who is actually going to want to watch this film? And then that's dictated in monetary terms by how much will it cost to make, because you can make a film for £10 million, but if only, say, hundreds of people are going to see it, then you're never going to make your money back. So you've got to think about costs. It might be a great idea, but at £100 million, it's not necessarily a great idea. But at £1 million, it could be a great idea. So I do think of scale and the kind of film that I want to make and the kind of film that I can make. I was very lucky to make half a dozen films in Hollywood. I made 3 films at Warner's. I worked with DreamWorks. I've worked with Columbia. So I've been into that, in and around that system. And it's quite a different system from maybe being an independent European producer. So we made a decision to stay here in Europe and to make films in primarily the UK, although we make them, wherever we can, at a certain budget level. So we make films probably in the area of £2 to £3 million upwards to about £10 to £12 million. That's kind of the area. Carol, which we did shoot in the US, we developed, and that was made for about 16. Colette, more recently, was made for about $14 or $15, which nets down to about 10, 11 million pounds. So that's the upper level. And then there's much smaller films that we've made, like Hyena, which was a couple of million. So we are looking at stories that can be made that have strong European, because we are European and we want to make films in Europe. We're looking at films with that usually with a European feel, or if they are going to be American, that have got something else that feels unique and different and relevant, that is worth the while of going off to America to try and make and fund. So I suppose those things do come into our heads when we're looking at scripts or looking at stories or looking at the possibility of developing a film or making a film. The other thing that also comes into play, again, perhaps subconsciously or maybe more than that, is how am I going to get this funded? Who's going to come out there and hire a writer and and push this along with me? Film is a collaborative effort. You know, it's not sitting there with a typewriter or standing there with an easel and a paintbrush. You are always working with somebody else. If you're a director, you're going to be working with a writer. If you're a writer-director, you're still going to have to be working with a producer. If you're a writer-director-producer, you're still going to have to be working with a financier. And so it goes. You know, you can't make a film on your own. You know, and so the collaboration begins at the very, very, very beginning of any project. And for us as producers, we're always thinking, okay, so how do I get this we think this is a nice story, we think this is a good idea, we think this is a good project to pursue. Who's going to do it with us? Who's going to give us some money to go out and get a writer? Who's going to help us with financing the first few stages of this project? So that is also a conscious thought when you're reading something or looking at a project, is how do I get this from, you know, again, from zero up to a certain level. So I suppose that, you know, what Channel 4, Film 4, I think we've got 4 projects with them at the moment. There are 3 movies that we hope to make this year, and that could well mean that we make 0 movies this year, or it could mean that we make 2, or maybe 1, or maybe 3. Who knows? But, you know, at the moment, the 3 of those are with Film 4, and we've always had a very strong relationship with them. They're probably, in fact, I think they are technically the largest company in Britain for development. They've got hundreds of projects in development, which is a good thing and a bad thing, because it means that although they've got hundreds of films in development, they only probably can afford to invest in about 12 movies a year maximum. So it means you're competing within Film 4. So you have to think, where else am I going to get financing for this film? So we have to think internationally as well. Somebody in France, Spain, Germany, Australia are going to like this project. The numbers we're talking about, once you get over £1 million or 2 million, you've got to think internationally. And that doesn't mean America, by the way, even though we speak their language. We have to think about other territories and why someone in Scandinavia might like this story. So it's very important as well to kind of think, well, can this work? How do I make this work in another environment, in another culture, in another language? Those factors come into play, and I think we are very considerate about that, and we always, coming back to collaboration, we always think maybe we should partner up with a European producer, maybe we should partner up with someone else, maybe we can bring in an Irish producer on this project. Maybe this is something we can do with this group of people over here, because they're great at doing this kind of film. We're not as experienced in doing that. You know, we're looking to think around, always looking at a way of moving things forward in a constructive way without thinking, oh, it's my project, I don't want to work with anyone else. Oh, no, I want all the credit for this. You know, you much prefer to have 50% of a great thing that gets made than 0% of a fantastic thing that nobody ever sees. So you want to collaborate, and you want to not let your ego get in the way if you can help it. But having said that, you also have to be very careful that you're not cutting off your nose to spite your face. You know, you have to be careful not to spread something around too thinly so that everybody loses interest after a while because nobody is holding it. You know, you have to have enough possession of something in terms of your intellectual property that you will run with it through fire, because somebody is going to have to run through fire at a certain point to get something made, because of all those things that I was talking about earlier. You know, there are so many films that could be made and are being made. The competition is huge. There's 15 films upwards released every week in the UK. Now, even if you're big film buffs, you're not going to see more than 1 or 2 films made a week. And remember, there's a world of cinema that was made before those 15 films as well that you've got to catch up with. So even if you go to the cinema every night for the rest of your life, you're not going to see those 15 films that get released every week. So 7 of those films are going to die. And it's your choice when you're choosing a project to decide whether or not you're going to be one of those films that lives or one of those films that dies. So that's where the fun begins. And that's where you have to really be serious with yourself about, okay, I'm going to do anything I can to get this film made, but you are going to have to get it made, and that's a serious decision.
Next question, please. Just there. Thank you.
Hi. So I have a couple of more practical questions. So you said earlier about sort of putting your eggs in multiple baskets and sort of having 7 to 12 projects that you're interested in. How do you even begin to like juggle that workload? And also, when you first start off in producing, where would you recommend is best to go for funding?
Well, we juggle it by getting on with it, really. I mean, Liz and I work together, and we tend to take the way that we've worked in the past, and we still work this way, I suppose, is that we are kind of lead producers on each project. We back each other up. So, there'll be a project book that Liz will like, or this is probably more literary than I am. I'm probably a bit more genre. And I'm also probably likely to lean more towards original screenplays, and this is probably more likely toward adaptations. So we will always, but we will understand what each other is doing, and we will come in when we need that support. So having 2 of us means that's a great way of moving forward. We have had in the past development people that work with us, but that means you've got to have a proper overhead. When you're starting off, the only overhead you're probably likely to have is your own rented accommodation or house, if you're lucky enough to own one, or apartment, or whatever it is, or, that's it, or shared office space, whatever you have. So it is much more difficult to obviously accumulate that many titles of 6 or 7, projects in development. But you have to try. And it just really is, I suppose, diplomacy. A lot of what we do as producers is we are talking with writers, we have relationships with directors, we have relationships with financiers, and just being as diplomatic as you possibly can about not trying to cross one project against the other. So directors by nature are usually, they don't want to think that there's anybody as good as them in the world, and they like to think that, that they are the only person. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're brilliantly talented. And I've even had dinner with some directors, and it's all gone well. But directors they don't want to hear about someone else's project, and writers either, really. And so you just have to be very diplomatic about it. You have to be in charge of 6 or 7. And you've got to let them feel that that's the project you're making. And often you feel that as well. You feel that when you're talking to that person, yep, we're going to get that made. It's energy. And as I am probably one of the luckiest people you'll ever meet, because I developed my passion for cinema at a very young age, and I've kept it going. And one day I'll get a job. I really don't think of myself as having a job. I think of myself, my extension. My life has always been an extension of what I do. So most of my friends are in the film business. Most of the things I do are in the film business. I go to Cannes every year. I watch every movie I can. I love cinema. I can always have a very strong dialogue. Writers, directors are good friends, and we talk all the time. I don't really, I don't have a problem with it, because I don't think of myself switching off at 6 o'clock. I don't see myself as being somebody that is 9 to 5. It's just what happens. And when you're off making your film, there's always benefits to the other films that you're developing as well. suddenly you're finding this financiers might be interested in the other film that you're doing, or there's an actor that you've met. I mean, I don't know, there's a million examples, but, you know, making Mona Lisa meant that when I did Shane Meadows' first movie, 24/7, I could ring up Bob Hoskins and ask him to meet with Shane, and that's how Shane got his first movie made. And that story is one of 1,000 stories I can tell, of anecdotes of how one film chips onto the other. When we made Carol, we approached Todd Haynes, but Todd is an old friend of ours. We knew that if we worked with Todd, we'd have to go to Christine Vachon, who is also a very old friend of ours, who's Todd's producer. Although we had developed the project, we went, Todd and Christine, and made it with Christine's company, Killer Films, who then had a project called Colette that they had been developing and wanted to make in Europe, and gave us the script and said, oh, by the way, can you guys read this? And we said, oh, this is good, but it's not great. Let's get a writer on. Rebecca Lenkovich came on board for us, did a great job. Through the process of making that film, we asked Rebecca to make Portrait of a Lady, which is a TV series that we're developing with BBC. So in a way, Carol was the catalyst that got us to do Portrait of a Lady with the BBC, if you want to follow it back. So each project is impacted by the other. So instead of seeing it as a disadvantage to have 6 projects, it's a distinct advantage, because each project feeds off each other. The writers, the talent move across, and you're in a stronger position. You're always on a, you know, they always say, oh, you're only as good as your last movie. That's partly true, but it's also, you know, it's up to you to take advantage of that situation. When we made On Chesil Beach with Saoirse Ronan, that was good timing, because Carol had been quite successful, and as had Saoirse in a film called Brooklyn. So when we came to finance that film, there was a huge amount of interest in a project that other producers hadn't been able to get financed over the years before. So the timing worked, but it was through the process of one success leading to another. And strangely, when we couldn't find UK distribution for Carol, of all films, it was the success of Byzantium with Studio Canal on DVD that led to a lunch I was having with the Studio Canal, who said, wow, you know, Byzantium's been really great on DVD. And I said, yeah, and why don't you guys have Carol? I mean, you're crazy, you know. And they were like, yeah, you're right, we are crazy. We should definitely look into that. And then they bought Carol for the UK. So having that out there in the ether, having 2 or 3 or 4 projects going, is actually a benefit to everybody involved. It's not just the singular project. It's your entire, it's you know, it's really your slate, as it's termed, you know, your slate of films. Each one's going to benefit every time you go forward with one of the others. So it shouldn't be seen as a negative, it should be seen as a positive.
And what was the second part of your question? Was about where to start with finance?
Yeah.
Yeah, so where do you start with
finance?
Well,
as I said before, it's not, that isn't easy. There seems to me to be a lot of money around from the BFI and from from the regional hubs, as they're called.
National Lottery?
Yeah, well, the National Lottery Fund goes to the BFI, and they have regional hubs in Bristol, Manchester, in Scotland. You can go to those regional hubs. I think south. There's one in London. There's one in South East, and apply there. There are obviously, which is a great thing. People are looking for projects with diversity. They're trying to get a 50-50 gender, which is great. Everything, they're trying to look for particular projects that appeal to them. It's worth trying to find out what that is before you even start, I suppose. You know, it's really working out. There are these places to go. The commercial end of it is very difficult because there are so few people that like to develop projects other than Film 4, BBC Films, BFI, 1 or 2 other distributors might give you a little bit of money for development. There's media funds who are European-based, who you can get money from, but there's a huge amount of paperwork you have to go through, but it's worth it because they do give you money. So there are places to go, and they are easy to access, but it's the projects themselves that have, there's a sort of currency, and some things are more current than others. So it's just trying to find that project or the spin on that project that will appeal to people, and that's to get your foot in the door. They're also, as I said, it's a collaboration, so it's really befriending writers and befriending directors who also have some cachet. The films that you're making, your graduation shorts, are going to be very important to you as time goes by, because they will be the only way you can get a foot in the door. And if they do manage to become, good, nice movies, and they get a few, possibility of getting into a short film festival, and even if it's in somewhere like Dinar or obviously Cannes, but let's face it, it's British, and Cannes don't really take a lot of British films. If you can get into the LFF, or you can get into, there are all these places where short films are shown, and there's a lot of them. A lot of film festivals show short films.
Edinburgh and Glasgow, yeah.
Yeah, Edinburgh and Glasgow, and it's very important to realise that that's your calling card. It's not just something you're doing to get it out of your system. But having said that, you need to make another short film afterwards. You need to be planning for the next short film. And remember, you've begged, stolen and borrowed to get your first short film made. You're going to have to beg, steal and borrow again to get your second one or even your third one made. So it's always a good idea to keep, even on that level, to keep as much activity going as possible and to keep your eyes and ears open. As I say, the first job I got was tearing tickets in my local cinema, which I thought was probably the best job I could possibly get, because I saw films for free. Working in cinemas now, like the Curzons or the Picture Houses or a place like this, very different. Here the emphasis isn't so much on just tearing tickets and showing people to their seats. It's on selling the food and selling and all the other periphery activities that go on. But I do think if you do get, you've got to supplement your producing or your directing or your writing by doing jobs. And if you can find a job, when I think about it, all I was doing in the cinema was showing people to their seats and selling popcorn and all the other, Mars bars. I was working in retail. I was working down the corner shop, really. But for me, because they were showing movies, I was in the film business, And I think that's important to recognise that if you're waiting tables, probably if you wait a table in the theatre, it's probably better than waiting a table in the local restaurant, because you're within the smell of it, you're around it, you're sort of close to it. And being as close as you can, even if it's humping films up steps for the projectionist box, is a better place to be than, lifting up, McDonald's boxes and local McDonald's. If you can get a bit close to it, it's good. And I think if that's, no matter, we have interns at our company for 1 month. And it's surprising how many of those interns over the course of the, dozen or 12 years or so that we've been having interns have gone into the business. Because they come and they work for a month and generally it's quite a nice environment, because we've got a very small office. There's only 2 producers, a couple of assistants and an accountant, and they get to do loads of stuff. They read scripts, they do crap stuff and they do good stuff. And generally we like to recommend them if people call and say, do you know anybody who can do this? Or we get to know them a little bit, and it works. It's a system that works. And that is, if you can afford it, and it's London and it's hard to, it's a thing to do. And most major companies in the UK do have internships, and it feels like, oh God, I'm going back to grassroots again. Oh my God, I've just done 3 years qualifying, and now I'm a film director, I'm a film producer, I'm a editor, I'm a DP. Why am I running around making a cup of tea for this wanker? And you think, well, that's what happens. You got to go back to their area again and do that, and it means you're making friends, there's a network of other people doing similar jobs to you, and you get into that universe. Breaking into that universe is not easy, and it's tough. It's particularly tough when you've been doing what you guys have been doing for 3 years, and you've been working hard at getting your first film made, and you've been working hard at understanding, getting your head around the things you have to get around to get your first film made, to go back to retail or whatever it is you're going to have to do. But that's kind of how it starts, and that's the only way to break in, is to get to know, and to be a good collaborator.
Next question, please. We'll go to the lady in the middle and then we'll come to you after that, so okay. Just pass that along, that'd be great, thanks.
Hi. You mentioned earlier you worked with Angela Carlton and Anne Rice. I was just, sorry, from a producer's point of view, how did you develop a script? How did you develop a script about such important pieces of literature that also had a following, and you also wanted to keep the integrity of the...
So as an important person, I didn't quite get the last bit that you asked.
It's, really sorry. It's, there are just important pieces of literature that you developed originally, that they were originally, and they had like a big following before that. How did you develop the script that kept the integrity of the original story, as well as making a film that was got expanded to more audiences?
So how do we...
So I think what she's saying is taking a piece of literature that has such a big fan base,
yeah,
and developing that and keeping the integrity of the original material, but having your own creative spin on it.
Well, they were very... Thank you, and sorry about that.
I'm sorry.
No, they were very, very different types of experiences, because Angela's was sewing together a bunch of very small stories, about fairy stories, basically, that she had written from her book, The Bloody Chamber, which was, I think, 3 stories in that book. One was called Wolf Boy, one was Little Red Riding Hood, which was then the Wolf Man, and then creating more stories to put the whole thing together, with the Little Red Riding Hood story being the main connecting story throughout. With the Anne Rice project, that was very different, because that was a huge bestseller. I think when she published that film in the mid-70s, it was the Harry Potter or the 50 Shades of Grey of its day. I mean, if you can imagine 50 Shades of Grey meeting Harry Potter, that's what Interview with the Vampire was. And so that was a different type of thing, because and that was a Warner Brothers film. Company of Wolves, we were bonkers, we were mad. I mean, Neil wrote this mad script. Channel Film 4 didn't like it, they thought it was too violent. We really went out there on a limb on that film, because it was people that liked Angela Carter said it was too gory. People that liked horror films said it was too intellectual. We worked with, we had a cast, we had Angela Lansbury, who's hardly like a huge superstar, and otherwise the cast were pretty much unknown. We had a 14-year-old girl in the lead. I mean, it was all, and we had special effects on almost every other scene. There was a special effect, which we had to kind of manipulate and do ourselves. It was an extraordinarily stupid thing to do, and I still to this day don't know how we got away with it. Whereas with the Interview with the Vampire, that was more of a science, because Neil Jordan wrote both the scripts, and he wrote Interview with the Vampire as closely to Anne Rice's book as possible. He was unaware of the fact there had been 17 other scripts of that film written before he got to it, and the first one was written by Anne herself. None of them were even remotely near, apparently, Neil's script, and he wrote it as, I mean, I remember him writing it. He had the book there and his computer there, and he just wrote from the book. I mean, it was, he just did it. And we had one goal with that film, which was the people who like the book should like the film. And that's exactly what the Harry Potter producers must think all the time, which is, as long as the Harry Potter fans like it, everyone else can fuck off, because this is for those fans. If you have something as big as that, I mean, I'm not a fan of Les Miserables, and, I went to see the musical, the film version of Les Miserables, and thought, oh my God, this is terrible. Like 20 minutes in, I was like, they're going to keep singing like this. But of course they're going to keep singing like that. That's what they did in the musical, you idiot. You know, you don't go and see Les Miserables if you don't like the musical, or if you didn't, you know. That's what you get. You get Les Miserables.
Dare I ask if you've been to see
No, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen The Unmentionable. But, you know, you deliver to the fans. And if something is a phenomenon, then you just basically make you get as close to the book as you can. And when we had a preview of Interview with the Vampire in San Francisco, we listened to what the preview cards said, and they didn't like the ending. So we changed the ending. They didn't like the music, so we changed the music. Because it was everybody who saw that film in the first preview in San Francisco were fans of the book. They'd recruited. Have you read the book? Yes. Is it one of your favorite books? Yes. Do you want to see a movie? Yes. And then it became like science. And that's what Warner Brothers, that's what they do. Except somehow, somewhere, thank God, the science went wrong with Cats. I don't know what they did. But they
There
didn't.
was no
Even the Cats fans didn't like it. That was what was really weird.
No, 4.
Yeah. So
It's all down to 4.
so it's two different ways of going, really. But I think, you know, Angela, to this day, isn't a popular. She's might be popular in this room, certainly popular in my family, and for where I come from, but isn't perceived to be an author on the scale of, you know, Harry Potter or J.K. Rowling or Anne Rice, you know. But it's different. Every single film you make will have a different type of methodology or a different type of approach to how you get to where you need to get. But they're two good examples of ambition. Company Wolves was made for 2 million. Interview with the Vampire was made for 60 million. They're going for the bigger goal. They're going for a smaller goal. So you don't need to be as careful with Company of Wolves. You actually need to be daring. You need to be a little bit more subversive. When you're going on playing on the bigger casino, you got to be safer. You got to deliver what you need for that top table, because you're playing with 60 million, and no one's going to secretly want to lose $60 million. Not normally, anyway. So you've got to think about the recruit. You know, how you're going to recoup that. People have an expectation for an already known title. And we don't do franchises. I mean, that was a long time ago I made Interview with the Vampire, but we generally make, I suppose, you could call them boutique films that don't have prequels or sequels. So every time we make a film, it's almost like we go back to the beginning again, which is bloody exhausting, but has its benefits. You know, once you've made a Johnny English, or once you've made a Hot Fuzz or a Simon Pegg comedy or whatever it is, that success means that you'll make 2, 3, 4, 5. The franchise market is what everyone is looking to get into, because, you know, you repeat the formula. You do it again. You do it again. You know, as we've seen with Marvel Comics and the DC Comics, and, you know, people go, they have an expectation of what to see, and they deliver. I mean, what I find extraordinary about the Marvel films, which I go and see, is that when I read Marvel Comics when I was a kid in the 60s, when these things first came out, and I was a big devotee, and there weren't that many kids in UK that you had to buy them on import. You know, Marvel wasn't a big brand in the UK in the way it was in America. And I'm astonished at how they can make those films as close to the comics as they are now. You know, my imagination always filled in the missing bits in those comics when I read them as a kid, and I never saw a Spider-Man, or I never saw anything that was filmically made from those comics that was any good. But now when I see those films, I'm real deep respect for what they do, because they are doing that thing of making those comics come to life. And when I see Thor or when I see those movies, I'm always like, I have real admiration for what those filmmakers have done now. They've really taken the art form of comic strip to another level. And the writing, the performances, the special effects, the sound, that's what I imagined they would be like when I read them as a kid. So,
Well, that's got to do with Kevin Feige as well, producer, isn't it? It's
probably,
his,
yeah.
His whole vision of the whole.
I don't really read about the backstories to them too much. I just go to the cinema and watch them and just walk out a day. And I know I never make a film like that. So, I do sometimes think, God, 5 minutes of that movie probably would fund like 20 of the films I want to make. Gravity was the one that I was astonished by. That's an astonishing movie. Just technically, it's astonishing. I mean, Sandra Bullock with a fire extinguisher in space or whatever it is didn't wow me too much. And I thought it was some silly things in that film. But just the special effects alone, just 2 minutes of that film would try my patience as a producer.
And was it you, sir, that had a question? Yeah? Okay, great. Have you got a microphone? Just pass it forward a couple of rows. That'd be great. Thank you. Thanks.
Right. So you talk a lot about, you said earlier, some of these projects that you have take years, if not decades, to develop. And some of them will shift through directors and writers and the like. How do you know when to walk away from a project?
Oh, God. I suppose they walk away from you, really. They get to a point where you've got a bookshop option, for instance, and usually it's X amount to acquire a book option. It could be for nothing if you know the writer or you're lucky enough to find a good agent that's selling the book, and you say, well, look, give it to me for 12 months for free, or give it to me for a year and a half for £2,000 or something, lowballing it, or you might get it for 3 years for $5,000. You've written a script over that period of time, and you realize that actually there is something that's fundamental to the book that you can't get into that script, and that it just isn't working, and it isn't the writer's fault, and it's not the book's fault. It's probably your fault, that you should probably have, you were probably overthinking it or underthinking it at the point where you got the rights on that. And that might take you 3 or 4 years or 8 years or 10 years or a few months, It's difficult to say, and it's difficult to know. I mean, I'm thinking of concrete examples of that, where that's actually happened, where a Japanese book that I had for a while, which I loved, adored, and a writer, a very good writer, writing it, and just realized that the culture was a key thing that just didn't work as a Western film. There's a crucial relationship that could only work within the context of Japan and how people behave in Japan. And it's a ghost story, and it's a fabulous ghost story. And it needed to either be completely subverted or something had to happen to it that just wasn't within my imagination or the writer's imagination or the director who was attached to imagination, or just perhaps would never have got there. But I should think our strike rate is about 1 to 1. I think we probably make, from the films we develop and make, I reckon we're about 50-50. That we make probably about half the films we begin, and we leave behind the other half. Sometimes you get to a point where it's actually better to let it go, because the writer that brought it to you is unable to achieve the goal that they were hoping that they could achieve, and you think, you know what, we could fire this person and then get another writer to write this, but that's just going to be too cruel. And sometimes, as I said before, you see a slew of films that are just like the one that you're trying to make, and you just feel, there's just probably no market for this anymore. But often, 99 times out of 100, somebody else tells you that. You get a tap on the shoulder, and it's somebody saying, you know what, you're never going to get this made. The problem with that, for me, is that by nature, that makes me want to move on harder and faster and more determinedly. I made a film called The Crying Game, which, again, I suspect not many of you see. Who has seen The Crying Game in this room? Okay. Okay, then all the old people put their hands up, and a couple of young people. Okay, The Crying Game was a fairly controversial film. It was nominated for 6 Oscars and won an Oscar for Best Screenplay. It was a huge success in America. It grossed $80 million. It was a world phenomenon, won lots and lots of awards. And the thing about The Crying Game is that it had a twist in the middle of the film that was always, the film was advertised as the film that you should not reveal the twist of. Okay, so
Don't do it now.
no,
Don't do it for
I'm
those
not
who
gonna-
haven't seen it.
you get a chance to see it. It's a good movie, but there were fundamental problems with The Crying Game that were that one, this twist, two, it was an interracial relationship between a white guy and a black woman, and it was also about an IRA guy on the run. So people said, threw the script at us and said, no one's going to want to see a film about anyone from the IRA. You can't make your hero an IRA terrorist. Two, no one in America, whereas the film scored its big success, will accept a black woman and a white man having a relationship. And three, the twist. It's never going to happen. So that was so passionately conveyed to me by American distributors who are normally so nice. I mean, you never know, when Americans say no to you in the industry, you don't even know they said no. You know, they've got 1,000 ways of saying no that are so wonderful. And you know, they take you out to dinner, they take you to their house in Malibu. You know, you go back to your hotel room and you wake up at 2 in the morning and go, fuck, they said no. They're not doing a project. But, oh my God, and you retrace the conversation because they do it so beautifully. And, you know, and even if you're conscious of it, they'll have a way of you know, oh God, if only you bought us this last year, and, you know, I really want to love this, but my boss, she doesn't like it, and he thinks this is great, but, you know, please stay in touch. And, you know, with this script for The Soldier's Wife, which later to be called The Crying Game, people threw it at us. They were like, get the fuck out of here. You are not making this movie. You are mad if you think Americans will like this film. They were so insistent. And that made me, I just thought, God, I've never seen them like this before. I'm going to make this movie. This is an important film to make. Obviously it's important. It's really pissing them off, you know. And it did get under their skins. And of course, the success of the film, and the incomplete success of the film, was obviously made me feel slightly triumphant, but also scared, because, hang on, all these wise people who know so much, who've been around for years, longer than I had, who study cinema, they study box office, they all know everything, they've got it to science, they were all wrong. Where do I go from here? Because I know I'm not always right. I don't know what makes a great movie happen. I just know that these great movies appear, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to be part of it, and I know what I like. But what I like, I mean, when I vote for the Oscars and BAFTA, nothing I vote for ever wins. You know, I always like the films no one else likes. So, you know, this is a particular year when, you know, why did the French not, you know, Portrait of a Woman on Fire is an amazing film. It doesn't even get nominated, let alone get in the frame. I mean, so many of the films I love. It's one of the few years, okay, Parasite's a great movie. Finally, Parasite gets some acknowledgement, but The Host was an amazing film as well. You know, the first film I saw with that director. So, you know, sometimes it's right, but often it's wrong. So I'm often wrong about these things, but I was so right about The Crying Game, and they were all so wrong. And that is a bad place to be. It's like winning the pools. You know, it's like winning the lottery. Because you think, I've won the lottery. I just have to do the lottery again and I'll win again. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. So you've got to balance what you hear and what people are telling you. And you've got to think, I'm kind of right, but that person over there said this, that person over there said that person, you know, you accumulate it all together and go, on balance, maybe I've taken this project too far. Maybe this isn't going to happen. And it is scary, you know, it isn't nice to develop a project alone because, you know, we have a responsibility not to ourselves as producers first and foremost. It's often to the writers, the directors, the people that were carrying. I mean, even the bloody financiers, you know. I mean, when we deliver a script, a first draft script, and nobody likes it, and you think, God, you know, it costs money. You know, there's a collective of people and who are attached to that. And whilst we as producers might be developing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 movies, often that writer has just been working on that project for 6 months, and he or she, that is their life. And you've got to remember that as a producer. You've got to remember you've got a moral, not a word that people use too much in the film industry, you have a moral obligation to try and do everything you can to make that work. And coming back to the question earlier about balance, how do you balance them out? It is a tough one, because you know, if you're gonna like lose that project, then you're also losing the friendships maybe you've built up, and the trust, and the solidarity with a group of people, certainly 1 or 2 people or maybe more. But you're also losing a bit of your own confidence going forward, because you think, how was I got that so wrong? Why did that work that way? Why was I foolish enough to start that process? So often there's a lot of self-analysis going on. You know, there's a lot of questioning of those things, and it's easy to just brush all that aside and just, you know, you have 6 sparkling jewels, and someone goes, I want that one. Great, fuck the rest. We're just going to do that one. You can't do that. You say, okay, that's great, but what about all this one over there and that one? Let's place that one there. You've got to be careful not to get too full of yourself.
Hello, in the red top up there.
Thank you. Hello. Going back a little bit on the topic of culture, and actually continuing slightly on the more or less backlash that sometimes you might have to go through, and quoting what you just said before in the beginning about being the voice of reality, how does that work sometimes, for example, in the case of Paolo Sorrentino with Youth, or just like, because it was a film that personally for me it worked, but I read a lot of comments that weren't extremely happy, and I understood that probably was because it was Italian, and I don't know if you agree in some way.
I don't know. I mean, I love Youth, but I mean, that was an interesting project because we were co-producers on that film. So Paolo's producers came to us and said, look, we want to shoot this film in the UK. I'm a huge fan of Paolo Sorrentino's work. I loved The Great Beauty, but I also loved Il Divo, his early films. I've always been a big fan of his work, and we were very flattered and honoured that they came to us and said, we need a UK producer, and we've heard about you guys. And there was partly that. Also, they wanted to get Michael Caine, and because I had made Mona Lisa, and Elizabeth and I have made Little Voice, and I also made a film called I've worked with Michael 3 times, and I think they were sort of thinking, well, if we get these guys on board, maybe we might get Michael Caine as well. And Michael Caine's agent was very pleased we were on board, so that helped a little bit. But, you know, that was a movie where we were involved in it. We shot all the stuff in London. I was very, you know, it was great to work with Paolo and to be involved in the film, but it wasn't a movie where I would go in and tell Paolo Sorrentino to chop 15 minutes out, or more nudity, less nudity, more violence, no violence, you know, there was no way. Paolo made Paolo's film, and we were just pleased to be part and process of that, you know.
Would you have, though, if you'd had the opportunity?
No. I liked it. I thought it was a good movie. I liked the script, and I loved the film, and I thought Harvey Keitel was far better in that than he was in The Irishman.
For sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you know, but I would say that, wouldn't I? You know, I mean, I'm I think when you get attached to films, even if you're just in that case, we were the UK producers on that film, and we became good friends with Carlotta and Nicola, the 2 Italian producers, and Paolo, and it was a lovely relationship, and we really want to work with those guys again on something. You know, it'd be great to shoot in Italy, and we would love to do that. But you do, you know, that or something even more importantly that you developed yourself, it becomes like a bit of a, you know, it's an extension of you somewhere. And, you know, in the same way as you can be really mean to your brother or sister or your mom or your dad or your relatives, you know, but if anyone else is mean to them, you're emotionally upset. You kind of feel that way about your movies, you know. I mean, Absolute Beginners, for instance, which is, I think, probably on the clips you saw with David Bowie, I made that film almost simultaneously with a film called Mona Lisa, which was a much smaller film, which originally was going to be Sean Connery and ended up Bob Hoskins and wasn't with Michael Caine. Mona Lisa was something that nobody really, didn't appear on anyone's radar. Cost was very low budget, £2 million. Absolute Beginners was on everyone's radar. That was the movie, the famous movie of the 80s that, you know, Sade and Ray Davis and Paul Weller and everyone was doing music for it. We had this amazing cast. It was about the riots in Notting Hill, and it was a book that people loved. And Absolute Beginners was given the worst ride by the film critics of any film that I've produced. They rained shit on that movie. They hated it. Philip French, who was one of the best film critics, sadly passed away, and who was good friends with Philip. We used to hang out and chat about movies for ages. But Philip made it the worst film of the 80s.
Wow.
Of the entire 80s. And then in the 90s, when he did his worst film in the 90s, when he named the worst film in the 90s, he said, but still wasn't as bad as Absolute Beginners. So he named it the worst film of 2 whole decades. That's how badly it was hated. And yet, even though I actually wrote, because I used to write about cinema as well, and I wrote the cover story for Time Out, which was when Time Out wasn't a free, awful rag that they give out at the train station, when it was actually a good magazine. But I wrote the cover story of Time Out, which was called Absolute Nightmare, Diary of a Film Producer. And it was a nightmare making that film. It was awful, and it was just for lots of reasons. I mean, just awful film to work on. And it was just terrible getting it to the finishing line. Mona Lisa got 6 Golden Globe nominations, won the BAFTA for Bob, won the Cannes Prize for Bob Hoskins. You know, we won everything. Oscar nominated. And Mona Lisa was a story that I was very close to. It was, you know, Neil and I developed that project together. I had to bring a writer on because the writer-director couldn't finish it. I brought a guy called David Leland on, and I worked very closely on that script and that idea. I pushed Bob Hoskins. Neil didn't want Bob. You know, it was a lot of emotion in that film for me. And was very pleased with the film's success. But people would say to me, oh, you must be so pleased about Mona Lisa. Shame about Absolute Beginners. And I was immediately, like a parent, you know, feel like, oh, it's so well, your little Petula's done well, but Johnny's done badly at school. And I'd be like, fuck you, I love Johnny. You know, fuck Petula, for God's sake. Everyone loves Petula. What about, fuck, you know. So I felt that way about Absolute Beginners, a film I didn't even like very much. I just feel so, you know, you become part of the process. You can't walk away from your own film. You know, I can't actually sit here and slag one of my own movies. I just feel it becomes too much. I know what everyone went through on that film. I know the heartache, even if it's a film that you can watch and wince and think, what were we thinking? Or why did we do that? Or did we really think that music was good? Did we really honestly think audiences were going to laugh at that? You know, whatever you're thinking, it doesn't matter. It's your private emotion, and you still walk away from it loving it. So that's, you know, that's one of the downsides of what we do, filmmakers, all of us, is that you, in a way, you make a pact with something which is an inanimate, stupid thing that sits around. Might, if you're lucky, get shown in the cinema these days. Certainly will show on Netflix or Amazon at some point in your life, hopefully, and will almost certainly turn up on a plane. So it's there, it's out there, and you resign yourself to the fact that no matter what anyone says about it, it's part of you, for better or worse.
We only have this room till 5:30 because people are going to come in and watch films, unfortunately. So we've probably got time for one question. Stephen, do you want to?
I don't know. Somebody at the very, very back. Does anybody at the very, very back have a question? Because they're all hiding back there.
No,
they were the people who didn't want a question. There's a man in the middle there.
We've got two here. Oh, we've got three here. Do you think we can get through these three?
Yeah, I'll be
we?
really fast.
Okay, let's go. You, sir.
Do yes/no questions.
Furthest away. Man in the white, right in the middle. There we go. Get in there, and then we'll come along the line and come down.
I just wanted to ask, what are you looking for when you about to choose a director to attach to a project, and to talk about a little bit about your collaboration with the director to any project?
I think first and foremost, what we're looking for with directors is somebody whose work we can see. Generally, it's very hard with a short film or with a promo or with a commercial to understand how that he or she will expand to a feature, unless you get to know them really, really well, or you have massive confidence, or they've made a lot of short films. So it's very hard to, we do often work with first-time directors, but they've often been working in theatre for a period of time, or they've made a series of short films, or they've done something outstanding, which we feel is right. And sometimes casting directors, a bit like casting a film, some directors are right for certain things. So if it's a fantasy horror project, for instance, you're not likely to ask Mike Leigh to come and direct it. And by the same token, you're not likely to ask Tim Burton to make a film in the Marduk estate in Dagenham. There's going to be horses for courses. And, I can't really answer that any better, really. It's just not, there's no automatic, obvious way. Some theatre directors make the transition to cinema really well, and theatre directing is a very good place to come from, because performances is what we always remember. What we remember about films is generally the performances, is the acting. We don't really remember the director. I mean, general public, and even film schools students don't always remember the direction. But what they will remember is the performance. So theatre directors come with a certain strength. They may not understand the camera, they may not understand the cinema language, they may not understand everything there is to know technically about directing, but what they do know is about performance, and sometimes that's enough. If an actor gives a standout performance, he or she will carry the film, and if it's got a good enough script. So theatre director, getting a performance from an actor, that is fantastic, to get someone to give a good performance. They don't just do it on road. I mean, we were talking about Robert De Niro. De Niro with Scorsese is generally a cut above De Niro as De Niro. And that's because the director is working their magic. So, getting a performance is something. But then some theatre directors really don't know how to make films. And we all got very excited about theatre directors making the transition. And again, it doesn't always happen that way. It's not that simple. So it's different every time.
And then if we go along the line, did you have a question? No, it's fine. Okay, and then a gentleman down here in the blue. Yeah, was that you? Go for it. It's the last one. No pressure. Make it a good one.
I just want to, you mentioned that you've worked both in Hollywood and sort of independent European productions. I just sort of wanted to know your experience in both and how it compares.
Well, I mean, God, it's hugely different. I mean, producing splits up very quickly into 5 areas, which is, sort of development, financing and packaging, shooting, post-production, marketing, selling. Basically 5 areas. In Hollywood, it's very different, because they have an entire studio system that does all those things. They have their own people, that they've got the entire, what they call D people, D girls, D boys, development people who develop stuff for a long period of time, and they fund their own films. They have line producers on tap to be on set all the time to make sure things are going right. They have post-production supervisors, and they have their own marketing advertising people. So in a way, your role as a producer can be, in all those areas, slightly redundant or not as strong. So working in a studio is often because you've been mates as a producer. When you see a producer credit on a studio film, it's often because you're mates with a A-list actor, or you read a book once, or you might be a good trainer, or maybe a good tennis coach. And, over tennis, Leonardo DiCaprio said, you know what, I'd love to make a film about that tree. And then you go to the studio and say, Leonardo's going to be in a film called The Tree. And they say, great, here's $500,000. See you at the premiere. They make The Tree, then you turn up at the premiere, and then you're a producer. That is simplistic, but not, I promise you, that's kind of what happens. So when you're producing in the studio system, you basically do something significant, deal drugs with a major A-list actor, or you work out with a A-list actor, or you do something which really means that you've got a hold, and then the studio goes, whoa, oh my God, this is a project for Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver. Wow, great. And then you're a producer. So we don't really have much to do in a studio picture, and it's a great life if you want to make studio films. But they control everything within the studio, and we have chosen as producers in Europe to make films in a different way at a different level. But I really love it. I love making those films in the studio system because you do have, you don't have the same stress and worry. It's life is slightly sweeter in terms of sleeping at night and not worrying too much about going over budget, because they control, they guarantee their own films. There's less. I think I did a film called In Dreams for DreamWorks. We reshot the ending 3 times. At one point we were shooting on the old soundstage at Warner Brothers, where they shot all those kind of Errol Flynn 1940s movies like The Seahawk, all the Michael Curtis movies. And I thought, I'm in Hollywood making a movie on a stage. We reshot it 3 times. That is major cost with Robert Downey Jr. and Annette Bening and everybody involved. And they don't even blink, and you think, oh my God, this is incredible. So that experience of working with the studio is entirely different. If we were making an independent film, I'd have to go around with a begging bowl to get people to put in, because we want to reshoot an ending or another scene or another day's shoot. Oh my God, it's impossible. Everybody's given their money already, and I'm sure, it's a different process. It's a more painful process, but a more rewarding process if you're making films independently, because at the end of it, let's face it, as a producer, I would never ever tell, I've directed as well, and I think there actually was a clip of a film I directed in that little montage there. But as a producer, I never tell the director where to put the camera, and I never talk to the actor about their performance. That is the director's prerogative. He or she, it's their job. They get to put the camera where they like. I do sadly have to say, if we don't finish this scene by X amount of time, then we're going to lose it, or I don't know what we're going to do. I have to rewrite the script. And then if he or she want to talk to me about how we can do that, then I'll make some suggestions and say, well, maybe shoot this in 2 shots and not 3, and maybe I could do a second unit and run over there and shoot all the pigs or the dogs, and you have to worry about that, and then you can put that in later, or whatever it is, whatever you can constructively say. But generally, I know as a producer that when shooting begins, that's not my prerogative anymore. And so for me to have a sort of emotional and passionate connection with something, I need to carry that. I need to want to make that film a lot. And within the studio system, you're making the film they want to make a lot, generally. And I do, you were talking earlier about the guy who revolutionized the idea of Marvel and comic strip movies. And I do admire those people hugely, because they're balancing the demands of the studio and the demands of an international audience, which is a massive responsibility. And it it can make or break you. So working within the studio system in itself is also fairly exhausting at a certain level. But it's also, there's no personal reward for that. We all want to make films that make money, because if we make films that make money, then we can make more films. It's a simple fact. I would rather make a film that does break even, at least, or makes a little bit of money, so that everybody involved can make films again. You know, anyone who's associated with a success, no matter what that film is, will go on to continue their career in the film business. So, I mean, even the bloody caterer on The Crying Game got more work after the film. You know, it goes down to that level. Everybody on a successful film goes on because everybody likes to want to work with you, because success is something that we all gravitate towards. So we do want to make our film successful. But having said that, we also want to make statements, and they should be personal statements. We want to make films that mean something to us, because primarily that will mean something to everyone. And that's something not, you know, I'm being quite flippant with some of my answers, but and when I talk about as if I know, I have no idea. I really don't. I mean, you could probably take the last hour and a half of talking and just throw it away. But really, I don't honestly know. I can answer your questions as honestly as I can, but they aren't necessarily the answers you want to hear or that will help. But what I do know is that some of the best films that I love and that you all love will be made by people who really have something to say at a time when their voices should be heard. And that is the one thing that you should always think about is, you know, we need new voices, and we need, at a time when we're in such a terrible place with the world, and we are in a terrible place with terrible, awful, or horrible people running it, we need good, honest voices to tell us the way forward. And cinema has been able to do that, and that's something that we still rely on. And we haven't, you know, we haven't run out of great movies. There's great movies to be made, and there's real stories to be told. And now people are getting an opportunity. People who have been ignored for the entire history of cinema, their voices are being heard. So now is a great time to make films. And I think that there isn't a rule book, but there is one rule, which is that if people don't go and see your movie, then you probably won't get a chance to make it again. So,
you've made some, I mean, such important stories, told such important stories with so many voices, and I hope that you continue to do it for a very long time. Thank you so much for your wonderful words today. So Stephen Woolley, everybody. You guys are invited for a drinks reception in the green room, so if you want to make your way out and enjoy the rest of the time, and good luck, everybody. Hopefully I'll get the chance to do a Q&A with some of you at some point in the future, so good luck.
I think it was the blue room, actually.
Is it the blue room? Did I say green room? It's blue room, sorry.
Thanks already, but could we say thanks also to Edith as well?
Oh, my pleasure, guys.